Welcome to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we're two best friends who usually do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today is a very special episode because we want to welcome to the pod award-winning author Fonda Lee.
Our new best friend.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course.
Thanks
Fonda
for being here.
Published numerous novels, including the sci-fi series Exo and the fantasy series The Greenbone Saga, which we will be covering for our pod in season 4. But most importantly, she has a new novella, Untethered Sky, out today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Can you tell us a little bit about Untethered Sky?
So Untethered Sky is a novella. It is what I have been describing as like a wildlife memoir with monsters. So one of the things that inspired me to write the story is the fact that I have always enjoyed like animal companionship stories from when I was a child. So like Where the Red Fern Grows and My Side of the Mountain and Julie of the Wolves and like all those stories of kids like surviving outdoors with animal companions, which was very ironic because that is absolutely not me. I was like the bookworm in the library. And so I would have very little in the way of survival skills in the outdoors. But I love those stories of animal companionship. And it was one of the things that just kind of has been a long time. Oh, what if I did a story like this, but instead of animal companions, it's the fantasy and writer in me says, well, let's do monsters. And I had started this project as a novel way back in, I think, 2015 or so. So this was before I had published the Greenbone Saga. And I had started playing with the idea of a young woman who trains rock, so one of the mythological giant birds of prey. And I got sidetracked from it because I went and wrote an enormous epic fantasy series. And after I wrote this series of really just chonker books, my brain sort of rebelled and was like, you know what I would love to do? I'd love to write something short. And I had this idea that this project that I had started that I had never finished, and I went back to it and I looked through it and I said, I still really love this idea. And now that I'm looking at it with fresh eyes, I think it would make a great novella. So that is how Untethered Sky came to be.
I
love it.
Yeah, I love that so much. It definitely has the animal companionship elements you're talking about. And
for sure.
I grew up in the open space without the animals, but I definitely pretended that I had lots of fantastical animals following me around. So I totally.
I mean, I'm still like thinking I'm Julie of the Wolves and going out with my goats and living that. But it's not quite as cool. Fonda, I have
goats aren't entirely different from wolves.
I mean,
they can
pretty
both
close
be quite dangerous
when they're hungry.
You
never know. Fonda, so I know a weird amount about you from hearing you on other podcasts. I listened to Ink to Film with James and Luke. And so I've heard you several times on their podcast covering The Godfather. And I was so surprised listening to their podcast to hear that you have a background in economics and that you're a martial artist. And when I first heard that, I was like, this is the coolest person I have ever heard about in my life. And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, how did you get into writing? And how does that background in something so different like affect your writing?
So I got into writing as a career swerve. I had always enjoyed writing just as a hobby. And it was something that I'd loved to do since I was a kid. And I just sort of had in my mind like this pipe dream, oh, one day I would love to publish a book. But I had a whole other career in business and did that for over a decade. And then at some point I was like, you know what I want to get back to? I really want to get back to writing. And it's not been something I've been able to do as much as I want to. So I basically did a like career 180 and went hard into really just being serious about my writing and finishing novels and sending them out on query and trying to get published.
Sure.
And so here I am, next career, and I'm loving it. But in terms of what like that background has brought into my writing, I think it definitely has affected it in different ways. Certainly having a background in business has made it for me so that, and you will discover this when you read the Greenbone Saga, that the world building elements for me have to include like how the country works or the made up world works economically. And so like the world doesn't feel entirely real to me unless there is some, unless I figured that out for myself in some way. And also, the martial arts aspect is just sort of something that makes it a lot of fun for me to write action scenes. So I have been training martial arts for a long time, and writing action scenes and combat scenes is something that I think benefits from that background, because I can kind of see the scene play out in my mind before I commit it to paper.
That's actually really refreshing to hear about the rules, because I know Hannah and I have read other fantasy series and we've thought like, how does this happen? This is never explained. It doesn't make sense that these things could happen. So looking forward to that, because we also like to have a set of rules.
And I've actually read the first book in the Greenbone Saga. So definitely the action scenes are coming to mind with the martial arts and everything. And I loved the first book, so can't wait to reread and cover it. But I did wonder, what was it like going from like writing more sci-fi and the Greenbone Saga and writing like these epic tomes to coming more to like a historical fable novella? What was that like?
Oh, I mean, I really love the variety. I think one of the things that it keeps writing fresh and exciting for me is just being able to move between different lengths, different subgenres. And, I see myself very much staying within speculative fiction, but I went from science fiction to fantasy, and then to this sort of short fantasy, this little fable like thing that I wrote. And then I have my next project is a science fiction duology. So I'm going back to science fiction, and I'm also working on a YA fantasy. So I just bounce between them pretty easily. And I think really the biggest adjustment for me coming off of writing Jade Legacy, which was this third book in a trilogy and spanned like decades of time in the narrative, and had this huge cast of characters and was 700 pages long. Going from that to writing this slim novella that was very tight and single POV and a very sort of intimate story, so was a good way. It was kind of like, I don't know, doing one exercise like bicep curls or something, and then doing like the opposite exercise of like, I don't know, stretching out some bicep stretches or something like that.
I was going to say like a tricep pull down, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, right. And having that, just doing that creative muscle flex was really satisfying, because I got to basically do the opposite of a lot of what I was doing with my previous project. And a novella, honestly, when I started working on the novella, I was like, oh, you know what's so great about novellas? They're short. Short is just fantastic. And so I was really excited about it being short. But I think I almost tricked myself, because I thought, oh, well, if they're short, it's going to be easier. That's like, the equivalent of like 3 chapters in my epic fantasy. But a novella still has the bones of a novel. It's very much closer to a novel than it is to a short story. It still has the structure, but without all the subplots. And so you really have to work hard to be really economical. And I think that was the challenge was, I don't have the time. I don't have the page count to go into how the kingdom of Dartha works and its history and like the economics and like the way, like all the things that I would love to do with a big world building project like I did in the Greenbone Saga. Okay, I need to make that as trim as possible, and just really focus on Esther's story and her relationship with Zara, and everything else kind of has to be like sort of passing in the background, but it has to be really tight. And so that was a fun challenge.
That was actually my next question, was how does the world building differ for writing a novel? So novel versus novella. So you answered that for me. But I have another question. it's about the mythology within the story. So I have heard of rocks, and I always pronounce it rukers. Is that how you would pronounce it? And manticores from mythology, like Middle Eastern or Persian mythology. And I was kind of curious, like, what led you to want to write about these creatures specifically, and if they were meant to like kind of symbolize anything in particular for you.
Well, the Middle Eastern mythology and the setting of Dartha, which is very much based on pre-Islamic Persia, came about because not because I was trying to go into that particular time period or place specifically, but because I got excited by the idea of gigantic birds of prey. And so rocks, when I looked into them, they come from Middle Eastern mythology, and I wanted to have sort of a purpose for these giant birds. Like, how would they interact with humans, and why would we be training them? Well, we would be training them to hunt even more terrifying creatures. And obviously like manticores came to mind because they kind of fit within sort of the same ecosystem, if you will, as the rocks. And so that's how it sort of came together. I was like, wow, giant birds of prey, cool. Well, giant birds of prey hunting like other monsters also from Middle Eastern mythology. Cool. Okay, now I've got to build the world around it so that they feel like they're in their natural environment, if you will.
It definitely worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I noticed, and like you've talked a little bit about this, about loving like growing up with the animal companions. I noticed with like Esther and Zara, though, you always made sure to make it more like realistic to what it would be like a relationship between a human and their like bird of prey that they trained. And like there was a limit to Zara's connection to Esther, and Esther seemed to realize that. Like, how did you decide to kind of focus in more on a like realistic relationship than a more fantastical one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a great question, because when you think about fantasy animal companions, so often it's like animals that are very human in the sense that there's like some sort of psychic bond, or there's like, you know, they have this like telepathic connection, or they can talk, although I love some of those, like the ones that come to mind for me are like, you know, the Temeraire series, or like, you know, the daemons in Phillip Pullman's series, Golden Compass. So although I love those, my tendency as a fantasy writer has always been to create worlds and characters that feel extremely grounded. So this was the case with the Greenbone Saga, where I took like those really fantastical martial arts abilities that you would see in like off the wall, like kung fu flicks and like wuxia fiction. And I tried to make that feel as grounded and as real as possible, so that you could kind of like imagine it being, well, existing in like a world like ours. And that's what I did in Untethered Sky as well, where I just wanted these monsters to feel like animals. Like, monsters have such a huge place, right, in mythology and in our stories. And, you know, fantasy animal companions are like all over the place. But it was just appealing to me to make it feel like very, I don't want to, I mean, I guess the right word is mundane, but to some extent, right, mundane, in that like I want the reader to feel like, oh yeah, it's natural that you would have a giant bird would have just like so much bird crap that you would have to like sweep out of its pen every single night, and things like that. So trying to make that feel very realistic. And I think that was part of making Esther's journey feel authentic to me emotionally, was not just, oh wow, look, this is such an amazing cool thing, I have like this telepathic bond with this animal, but actually training an enormous bird of prey would be super dangerous and incredibly there'd be a ton of drudgery, and there'd be a lot of hard work day to day, and that's sort of what I wanted to convey, even though I'm using fantastical mythological creatures.
Laura, as a hobby farm owner, appreciates that sentiment.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, like, what was the interest in the birds of prey specifically? Because I am a bird watcher and I'm a hobby farmer, so I have like a lot of animals. But I was curious, like, I wonder with the birds of prey thing? And then you mentioned previously you got interested in them. How did that come about?
A few different things, actually. So first, I had there was a documentary that I watched called The Eagle Huntress. And it was several years that I watched it. And it kind of stuck with me. It was about this young woman in Mongolia who is training to become an eagle huntress. And it's part of like the culture of her people that they train these golden eagles to hunt wolves, which is just super badass. Amazing. And then I also read a memoir called H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. That was about kind of her journey through kind of grief and coping with her father's death, but at the same time training like a goshawk, and like how just her experience doing that. And it was a fascinating memoir. And I was in Dublin for Worldcon and tacked on a family vacation and went on a hawk walk with my family because I've always been fascinated by birds of prey. And so that was just this cool experience of like walking with an actual expert falconer and having like the hawk come to my glove and fly off after things and after the lure and everything. And so just sort of, I guess, a number of little things that just sort of added up and turned into like this. And I think fantasy writers in general, we do this. We're like, this is cool. I want to explore it. How can I turn it into a story? Like, how can I justify the time I'm spending looking into something as like book research? And so that's how it all kind of got pulled into this novella project.
I didn't procrastinate today. I researched.
This trip to Disney is totally relevant. You have to go to Animal Kingdom.
Yes.
I did want to ask, because like this is a novella, and you talked about how you had like kind of worked on it as a full-length novel. Was there anything that you had to like cut out from your original plan with the novel to what you did like creating the novella?
I think now that I think back on it, I just basically had to set it aside and write it from scratch there, because the structure that I had in my mind was different once I transitioned it to being a novella project. And it worked much better as a novella project, because when I started writing it as a novel, there wasn't enough going on, if that makes sense. Like there weren't other characters or other side plots. It was just kind of like, well, I realized like the heart of it was like Esther and Zara. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of focused in on that and turned it into a novella, it all kind of like clicked. Because when I started working on it as a novel, it was kind of like meandering. I was like, well, where is the story going? I don't know. And sometimes this happens with projects where you step away for a while and you come back and then you realize, oh, I can change something. And maybe it's, you go from the first person to third person, or vice versa, or you go from a novel project to a novella project, or actually maybe this short story is actually a novel, and things kind of fall into place then.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
So in Untethered Sky, I know that's mainly a story about Zara and Esther, but there's actually a lot of like really interesting relationship dynamics. You have like a character that has a really strained and interesting relationship with her family. She like creates this own community with people that she goes to work with. And then she goes on to, as they say on The Mandalorian, form a clan of two with her rock. So what is it about like families and relationships that kind of draws you in like as a reader and then makes you want to write about them as an author?
I have found that this comes up in all of my writing. So something that happens with writers is like we write stuff and then we later on look back on it and people tell us what we've written. And one of the things that I've realized over the course of now, I guess this will be my 8th book, is I have like just dysfunctional family relationships and everything that I don't know how it happens. But I think that just whether it's, I think like family relationships are just really meaty material for me, and just something that I keep coming back to. And I think it does come back to, I like my family experience growing up. My parents were immigrants. We had this like, it very much did feel like it was like them against the world, if you will. Like they were very we had this like small tight-knit family, but at the same time, like my parents had this really rocky marriage that had so many ups and downs, and they split up and they came back together and they eventually divorced. And like, I'm very close with my brother. So the sibling relationship is one that I've obviously explored in the Greenbone saga. And so I think like just not only is there, do I just keep coming back to it because of something in me personally that I want to keep exploring family and relationships, but also because narratively there's always so much potential there. There's always just great tension, potential conflict, love, loyalty, drama. Like there's just no end of how you can kind of mine relationships for story. And I think also just difficult family relationships are something that everyone can relate to, honestly. Like who among us doesn't have, something that's kind of, that's a difficult family situation. And even if it's not exactly what you're reading on the page, it just allows you to see those characters as human and relatable. And even if they're in a completely fantastical situation with magic or high tech or on another planet or in a fantasy world, you see them as human because you can relate to them emotionally, and that it comes across authentic.
Absolutely. Love that.
And it definitely it helps ground the story when you're kind of showing relationships that everyone undergoes. And like you said, who doesn't have family issues? So
only liars.
Right. And this was a very interesting novella because it is almost like a reflective memoir from Esther's POV.
Right.
And I was wondering what was that like coming from the Greenbone saga where it was like multiple POVs? Did you enjoy only sitting with Esther, or was there ever a moment where you were frustrated in Esther's own limitations to her own thoughts where you couldn't learn from someone else's perspective?
Right. Both. There's so many advantages and disadvantages to having either a multi-POV story or a single POV story. And it's just kind of it comes down to what kind of story you're trying to tell and whose eyes do you want to see it from. And the Greenbone saga, I knew from the start it was going to be a multi-POV story because the focus really was on the family and it was a generational saga. So I had to kind of show this family evolving, and I could portray all these relationships through the eyes of different members of the family. And so it just made I was working with such a large canvas, and I could fill in that canvas with multiple points of view. With Untethered Sky, I think the biggest reason for me to really just stick to a single point of view was just the practicality of the novella format. Was you don't have the space to really develop a lot of characters when it's this slim story, and to really go deep and to build that connection. I kept that focus on Esther, and also because of the premise of it, which was that it's essentially a wildlife memoir with monsters. And so I really wanted to capture that voice of the memoir-ish voice.
You did it well. I always loved when there were pieces of her reflecting on what was going to come to pass and everything. It was a great way to read the novel.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I love Untethered Sky is that I think it's a really good gateway into fantasy for readers that don't always read fantasy. And I think the thing that hooked me was how you as an author gut punched me as a reader. And I was reading and I thought I was getting into this comforting story, and I thought I was going to have this cozy fantasy almost. And then it quickly became unpredictable. And I won't give away any but I won't give away anything at this point, but there's some snippets that the main character reveals early on, and I'm oh, I think I kind of get what direction this is going. And then it changed quickly, and I was not expecting it, but I loved it. And so I was kind of wondering, like, do you enjoy writing some of these gut-wrenching moments? And what do you think makes them most effective?
Yeah, no, I feel like I really haven't done my job unless I've done some gut punching. I don't I don't know, I
to
feel
be
like
punched in the gut.
So yeah, no, I really do enjoy writing those satisfying kind of climactic emotional scenes because at the end of the day, I want to make the readers feel something. And if I've done my job correctly, it should feel like what happens was you didn't see it coming, but you should have seen it coming. Like that's kind of the feeling that I want to leave with people, where like they don't know what to expect, but then in hindsight, it all like kind of fell into place and felt inevitable. And that's kind of it's a fine balance to tread when you're in the actual process of writing, of like dropping the breadcrumbs of how things are going to go, but also leaving the door open so like you don't, like those breadcrumbs could be pointing in this direction, but they could be pointing in a different direction. So yeah, no, I really I do love those like both the twists and turns and like pulling the right like emotional notes that I want to pull at the end.
And so in this novella, for people who are listening today, nothing too spoilery, but Esther is a rucker. Her ruck is Zara. But then throughout the novel, we learn about like other different characters who come in and out of her life. Was there a character that you almost wish you could have stayed with more, or had their POV in it, or just like a little bit more from them? But because of novella constraints, you were just like, oh, I guess that's going to be left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. I mean, I love Darius, who is really Esther's partner, I guess, like her best friend really in this story. And he's just I don't know, I like him. And I'm like
Me too.
I could have certainly spent a little more time with him, but I think like seeing him through Esther's perspective was also really satisfying, because like it was fun to sort of try and pull out his character and make him a vivid personality without being in his head, because he's so much like also very like reserved and like doesn't say much. And so like I had to find ways to kind of pull out his character without having that like interiority.
I really loved him, because a lot of times like with a character like that, it would be easy to almost have him be like someone who people would like overlook or not value as much. But it seems, because it's like, oh, he has an older ruck, he has, it has already been out and about, but it's like, oh no, but he's pretty awesome in this book. And he's kind of like nose to the grindstone, like hard worker and everything. And I really enjoyed every piece of him. So I'm glad you liked him just as much.
Yeah, I have a little secret, which is like I based him partly on my husband. And so I don't think he knows that. Have I told him that? No.
Is he listening in?
Yeah, is he listening to the tell him to listen to the episode. Yeah, he'll find out.
So I and this goes to the point where it's like oftentimes we build our characters as kind of like an amalgam of like people we've met or people we know. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so fond of him, is because I like pulled sort of some characteristics from my husband and his mannerisms into Darius.
That's amazing. So throughout the story, the Manticore kind of becomes less and less of a monster to Esther, and she starts to see it more as just like a creature trying to survive. Do you think, so I know this is a standalone, but do you think if this story were to continue, that there would have been maybe some like repercussions involved with over hunting manticores and the hunting of manticores, and like some of the ethical and ecological things you have to consider with that?
I can certainly imagine that. I can imagine kind of the dilemma that, like, and I think Esther alludes to this at one point, where she says that if we wipe out manticores, we're also like taking ourselves out of a job, right? And so she has this kind of these mixed feelings because she hates manticores, but she also sort of sees how they're a part of her world, and she thinks it's hubris to try and control nature that much, right? To think that you could basically conquer nature. So I think that is kind of one of the underlying, sort of subtle underlying themes is this idea of like man versus nature, and like how much do we try to fight against nature versus live in harmony with it. And that's sort of juxtaposed between, Esther being so connected to the countryside and to training, her bird and appreciating kind of the natural world that she lives in, how much she loves it. Like it's sort of set up right from the beginning that she was a kid who was always spending her time, in being out in nature and being with animals. And that's juxtaposed with some of the things that are happening on a larger scale in her country, and this movement to basically wipe out manticores so that they're no longer a threat to humans. So yeah, I could certainly imagine kind of the epic fantasy version of this story where there's like lots more going on with that particular conflict, right, between like the entire, I guess, rooking industry, if you will, and like the political aspects of like people who want their villages to be safe, and like the pressures that the king is under, and like so I could sort of see all that stuff going on, and then sort of had to be like, okay, that's all in the background.
That'd be so hard to put that all in the background, though, honestly. Oh my gosh, it's a lot going on.
Yeah. I mean, that's just for questions during interviews. And someone's like, could that have happened? And you're like, yes, it could have.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
It is happening in my version.
I know that you said that you kind of like to see how the world works. Like, what made you decide to kind of go with like a more kingdom-like, where there was a prince who's the eighth son, and they're working at the behest of the kingdom? Like, what went into your decision to kind of go down that road?
It's really to kind of have to set into motion the narrative like of Esther's journey and like how it all kind of comes to a head. So I when I started writing this, I was like, okay, she's going to train this giant bird to hunt manticores. Okay, cool. But like, what's it all leading to? And narratively, it has to lead to like basically her having an external showdown and an internal showdown, right? And so without like spoiling the end of the novella, those two things have to come together. And that's, I think, the case with pretty much all stories, is the external conflict and the internal conflict collide in some way. And that's kind of how I set it up, was there has to be sort of something that is pushing her beyond just sort of her normal day to day, eventually becomes being the trainer of this giant monster bird. And that is like already a really like extraordinary life. So like, what is the next, like, what's the thing that pushes her even to an even more unusual situation? And then, so that's how I set up like there being this huge hunt, and how does that kind of then intersect with more of her personal journey, like basically the trauma that she carries and how she like eventually faces it. So that's it. All this sort of has to kind of all dovetail together at the end.
It does that really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Esther's like such a complex character, and you have this backstory that is tragic, and you get these like feelings that, she thought she wasn't good enough for her parents at times and stuff like that. And then it seems like one interpretation could be like she's just like focusing on these goals and dreams to like be a rucker. And it seems more complicated, though, because as you get into more of the relationships that she has with people, she often is jealous, and she even deals with like imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but somebody described it as like a book just strictly about vengeance. And I was like, this seems so more complex than that. Am I on the right track that
No, you
Esther is
absolutely
supposed
are.
to be really complex?
No, you're absolutely right. And you're also right in that, like, I never envisioned it just as a book about vengeance. I think vengeance is sort of like the high concept thing that you can like kind of throw out there as like, she had this, she had this tragedy in her childhood, and she, that's motivating her, but that's not all that's motivating her, right? Like she is she's driven by like a few different things. Like she wants to have this connection with Zara. She also wants recognition for her work. She also has these, like you said, feelings of imposter syndrome and connection and disconnection with different people. And for me, because I don't train giant birds of prey, what I put into Esther's journey is tied very closely to the creative process and how I feel about writing. And so even though this is a book about like training giant birds, to me, it also encapsulates, I think, anyone, and hope that it can kind of like be relatable to anyone who has like a passion that they're driven to go after. And a lot of the feelings that she has about being a rooker, I drew those from my feelings about writing, right? This sense of like, oh, I really want to get good at this and be good at this. But like the day-to-day work is pretty hard and very thankless and not really well understood by most people. And there's like these moments that are really cool, right? Like when she has a big kill and she gets recognized for it, right? That to me was like the moment your book gets published. And then you go back
on our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So there's these cool moments, and then you go back to your day-to-day life of like sitting in front of your computer, or in Esther's case, sweeping bird crap out of her pen. And like all of those things that she goes through, right? Imposter syndrome and like being jealous of other people's success and like trying to like chase the high of like having done this one thing good this one time and like trying to like get better at that. Like all those things are part of writing for me. And I just sort of transplanted them into her career journey as well.
I mean, they're so relatable to any experience, I think, of any person chasing a goal, really.
Right. Yeah. Chasing a dream that like is sort of that's difficult and that a lot of people don't understand. And I think and hope that people will sort of find that for themselves when they read the book.
Well, and this is like, because you're talking about the writing process, do you have any advice or just some like, a little bit of your own reflection on deciding to become a writer after having a different career in life? Because I know a lot of people have thought about that as they go on their own career journey. So do you have any reflections on that?
Gosh, so many. I'm very, very glad that I did take the risk of going for it, really. Like I remember at the time thinking, oh gosh, maybe I will regret this. Maybe I'll miss going into the office. I don't at all. I have no regrets on that front. At the same time, it is a hard transition. I was used to a career that was very structured and pretty predictable insofar as, you had a job that you did and there were pretty clear expectations, and you could kind of expect that every year you would get a review, and that if you did well, that you were up for a certain raise. And after a certain number of years, you were up for a promotion. And that kind of mirrored, sort of academic life as well for me, like before I was in business. And a creative career is nothing like that. It is so, it's not something that is meritocratic in the sense that your work does not always get reflected in results. You could work on a book for a year and have it not sell. You could have a book that you think is going to succeed get drop by the publisher, or your publisher go under, or a book that you didn't know was going to succeed suddenly go gangbusters. Like you just don't know, and there is nobody to kind of keep you accountable day to day. And it is there's definitely struggles, and I think, to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't recommend that anybody like quit their day job and just go whole hog into being a writer, at least not for a while, because it is one of those things where it's like, I love being a writer, but I also don't know if I would recommend it, if that makes any sense.
Makes total sense.
I think like writers who are listening to this can probably relate, where it's like, oh, I love my job, but like, really don't do it. Like, I love it, but like, don't do it unless you're really, really sure. Then do it. But like, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
I forget what movie it is where it's like, I love my job, but if I could recommend you do anything, and if I could do anything else in this world, I would do it. But I'm stuck doing this job because I have to.
Yeah.
Laura, do you have any more questions?
That was my last one.
Okay.
Well, I could ask a question about The Godfather, but go ahead, Hannah. I think you had. Well, I guess my question related to The Godfather was more so related to the Greenbone saga, and I was kind of wondering. So I've heard it described as The Godfather mixed with urban fantasy and Asian influences, and so The Godfather is like one of my favorite books, minus some cringy parts, because there's some cringy parts, and I was just kind of wondering. Yeah, I don't know. It's really difficult, like as a woman, to be like, The Godfather is one of my favorite books. The looks you get from people, they're like, really?
Yes.
But
very
it
relatable.
Still has some really good moments.
Absolutely.
But I was just kind of wondering what it was about The Godfather that really stuck out to you, that inspired you going into the Greenbone saga.
So the trick with the Greenbone saga was, it is, The Godfather is a major inspiration, but what I wanted to do was kind of take it as a jumping off point. So or take what I loved about The Godfather and then write everything else that I wanted to write into that framework, and then like take it into its own like completely different direction. And hopefully that is what I've accomplished. So people seem to think so. But what really, I think, drew me to the reason why The Godfather is certainly one of my favorite movies, and like, yes, still one of my favorite books, despite the very, very questionable parts of it.
You just gotta shake a head.
You just got it. Yeah. Why? But anyways, but it just compels me, I think, because of something we were talking about earlier, which is that it is at its core, it's not a story about the mafia, it's a story about family who happen to be mafia, and that and so everything is just higher stakes for them, like when the rest of us have like disagreements with our family members, we might have like a few tense Thanksgiving dinners, but like when you're in the mafia and you have family disagreements, like there could be a drive-by shooting, so there's like, it's just like the stakes are so much higher with all of these relationships, and the fact that it is a generational saga, right? It is also, The Godfather is a story about the American dream and about immigration, and the story of like Vito Corleone coming to America and making his way, and then his children inheriting that. That is like, that's just, it just huge. It compels me hugely, like as a child of immigrants, and also, the just all of the like the drama and the like the. It's like that. There's other mafia movies that I love, but like none that are like as
they just don't hit the same way
sagas the way that The Godfather is. So that's what I wanted to do, was like, okay, well, I like that idea of writing a family saga, but also like with a lot of like intrigue and violence, and also I'm going to bring in magic and also like Asian influences, and that's how the Greenbone saga came to be.
It's a great way to, because I was going to ask, since the Greenbone Saga was actually won by listener voting. We have one series that we cover, so
you have a lot of
very
fans.
Popular. But I was going to ask, since we're about to start the Greenbone Saga, do you have any tips or insights we should think about as we go in and read the series?
Oh gosh, tips and insights. I guess I would suggest you ask yourself whether you want to spread it out or like binge the whole thing, because now you can, right now that the series is done. On one hand, I think that reading it straight through would be really enjoyable, because like you would just roll right into like what happened. The plot would just roll right along, and like there wouldn't be any like having to wait to find out what happens. But on the other hand, it's a lot. It would be a lot, I think, emotionally, to read all 3 books in a row.
Well,
I don't know.
Hannah has read the first one, and I have not read any, and I like instant gratification, so I might be one of those roll right through people.
Yeah.
Yes. We do actually usually cover the books 1 book a month, so we do like a deep dive into it. So I don't know if we'll read them back to back to back, and we might take breaks in between, because we've discussed a couple different ideas of taking smallish breaks, since these are huge chonkers of books. We haven't done anything this big since we read all of the Wheel of Time books. That was our season 1, and that would be intense.
A lot.
It was
that would be a lot.
Too much. Some say we went a little crazy around book 7, but
it was me. I said it.
if you've done that, then this should be a breeze. You'll be fine.
Well, I just have to, I guess that's our tip, is keep reminding ourselves that it is not Wheel of Time and it does have a finite amount. But no, thank you for that. We're looking forward to reading it. I'm looking forward to rereading the first book. I enjoyed it so much. I thought about reading the second book, before and then going back, but we're just so excited to read that. And we're so excited you came on the podcast today. Something we always ask is, what are you reading, watching, and or enjoying right now?
Oh gosh. Right now I feel like I have so little time to enjoy things, because I have so many books that I'm supposed to be writing, which is it's just a good problem to have. It's a good problem. But right now, because at the time that this goes live, I will have accomplished this. I am super excited to watch John Wick 4. And I have like my advanced tickets, and like, so I can't say that I've enjoyed it yet, but it is the thing that I'm most looking forward to enjoying very soon. And it was like, it's also my birthday this month, so I'm kind of like delayed my birthday dinner. Thank you. So I'm gonna do like birthday dinner and then go watch John Wick 4.
That's an excellent
Where can we find you online so we know whether or not you like John Wick? Very good segue.
You can find me. I won't be posting about it necessarily on my website, but my website is fondalee.com, and I am on Instagram at fonda.lee. I'm still on that cursed bird app at Fonda J. Lee. And I also have a Patreon.
Awesome.
You can find me there.
Well, everyone, look for Fonda on all those things. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk to us today. We appreciate it so much. Everyone who's listening, go out and buy a copy of Untethered Sky. It's a wonderful book.
Right now.
It has so many emotions, reflection, and plot in just 160 pages. So you could buy it and read it and then re-listen to this podcast all in one day. Like, there's so much you can do. But we thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you back on sometime after we read Greenbone Saga to do a deep dive into that.
Yeah, and it is so different from Untethered Sky that I'm often like, if you love this novella, also read Untethered, or if you liked Untethered Sky, go read the Greenbone Saga. If you didn't like Untethered Sky, you can still go read the Greenbone Saga. So
read it either way.
Read all of them. So thank you so much. And to all our listeners, have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.